Welcome to Harbinger and Adobe's joint webinar. Get ready for our exclusive and interactive e-learning session.
Select the right speaker for audio output. Test your speaker from audio settings. If necessary, join the webinar using your phone. Use the Q&A panel to share your questions. This webinar is being recorded. Attendees will receive the recording. Let's begin.
Hello everyone, my name is Rahul. Very warm welcome to everyone for joining us for this webinar. The topic of this webinar today is scaling AI automation and why investing in training is your real competitive edge. So we want this webinar and discussion to be an interactive one. Of course, we have a Q&A session at the end of it. The last 15 minutes we have kept for Q&A. But we would encourage you to share your thoughts, questions, comments throughout the conversation in the chat box, and we would love to kind of answer them and make it an interactive one. So to begin with, I'm your host for today. I'll be the moderator as well for this panel discussion. My name's Rahul, and I represent Harbinger Group. And I'm enthusiastic about leveraging digital learning solutions for workforce enablement and productivity. So what is our game plan for today? What are we going to talk about? So today we are going to build a case for AI investment by connecting skill development to performance and productivity. We'll also try to identify capability building opportunities that moves AI experimentation towards measurable outcomes, because I think there's a lot of talk that has already happened over the period of last 2-3 years, and a lot of AI experimentation has happened. Now is the time to drive it towards measurable outcomes. We'll also spend quite some time on talking about explaining how to build or design a learning ecosystem that integrates AI-enabled experiences with business outcomes, and also by keeping in mind that human in the loop would be there within that AI-enabled experiences. And lastly, we will close it out with, learn to how start with lean, practical training-led pilots to demonstrate value. There's a lot of possibilities with AI, but, we have to think through a starting point wherein we can do a lean pilot and show measurable outcomes and results out of it, and then scale it up. So we'll hear from our panelists today on that particular point as well. I think all of us would have seen some of these reports in various social media and online news and articles. One of the McKinsey's reports says it was towards the end of 2025, like between 2025 and 2028, 92% of companies plan to increase AI investments. But on the other side, only 1% of the leaders at those enterprises consider their company mature in AI development. So that looks like a big gap over there. Then another report from Pluralsight says that 65% of organizations have abandoned at least one AI project due to lack of AI skills. And of those, 38% have abandoned multiple AI initiatives for the same reason. And there was also a Forbes report that says that, there's a significant amount of dollar that has been invested in AI initiatives, but a lot of them stopped midway due to various reasons. So why are we talking about this? Is because, again, coming back to the same point that there are a lot of possibilities, but we need to narrow it down. We need to focus it down to measurable business outcomes and, run those lean pilots and then scale it. And now, please allow me to welcome our panelists and industry experts for today. So firstly, we have Dr. Alan Partridge. Good morning, Dr. Alan. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Rahul. How are you? I'm doing well.
Thank you so much.
It's a beautiful day here in Central Oregon. I'm not too far from the coast, and we keep getting treated to the most beautiful spring days.
Yes, it is spring season. So thank you very much for taking the time for joining us for this discussion. So Dr. Partridge, for the audience sake, I would request you to, if you could please talk a little bit about yourself, the work that you do, your organization, and more importantly, what makes you interested in this topic.
Absolutely. So everybody already knows my name. I work with Adobe, and specifically, I focus on digital learning experience related tools and solutions. And I joined Adobe after believe it or not, a quarter of a century in the college classroom, where I taught for ages. What got me interested in this topic is actually kind of um, apt for me, right? It's one of the rare problems that I've come across that actually requires this sort of peculiar mix of things that I happen to care about. So my background is a kind of strange one. My PhD is in art, music, theater, philosophy, and computer science. It's an interdisciplinary studies degree. And if you know anything about sort of doctoral programs and doctoral study, that the first principle of most doctoral study is that you are meant to narrow your field to the smallest possible item inside of a specific discipline. So my rebellious nature led me to do precisely the opposite. So I wanted to study a broad range of topics and look at what happens at the edges where interdisciplinarity meets. And because of that, I've been drawn to topics like this for the past 30 years. Everything from games, simulations, educational interactions, and scenarios. And I think the L&D field is now being asked to sort of figure that out at scale. And I think this is a point in history when we have a real shot at getting that right.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I think, yeah, with your experience of 30 years in the industry, like you have seen everything right from, probably the floppy disk days to now this, AI boom and everything. So it's really nice to have you on this conversation, and it would be really insightful to, hear from your experiences and thoughts as we progress into this discussion. Now, please allow me to welcome our industry expert and second panelist for the day today, Jeffrey Rush. Hi, good morning, Jeffrey.
Good morning, Rahul. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Right. So, Jeffrey, the same question for the audience sake. If you could talk a little bit about yourself, your organization, your domain expertise, and what makes you interested in this topic.
Yeah. Well, obviously, thank you for the opportunity to you as well as Dr. Partridge and the Adobe team. And obviously, kudos to both of you for all the critical work that you do. Obviously, I have the privilege of serving as the Senior Vice President of Healthcare Solutions at an organization called RisePoint. In many ways, we are a learning and workforce solutions company that has the privilege of working with 93 plus academic colleges and universities around the country in all facets of online education, supporting them really in always ensuring we have career, workforce, relevant, embedded learning in all that we do. And certainly, helping them along the journey of whatever it is to support their learners. And, previously served as the inaugural North America Director of Workforce Development at Siemens. And so, obviously, I don't have a cool title like Dr. Partridge, but what I'll say is, ultimately, I started up in hospital administration as the son of a nurse, grew an interest, obviously, in healthcare through my mother. And when I look at learning and development, of which is a space I've been able to be a part of for quite some time in various different facets, I think that I look at, this topic as sort of the ultimate manner of reaching everyone in a way that they need to learn. And so I'm always intrigued around it to envision as somebody also who does teach, just finished an undergraduate class that I taught as an adjunct, how much, we can really level the playing field when we use AI correctly from a learning and development perspective.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and that's very interesting that you said that level field, like make learning available to everyone, make it inclusive, and make it available in a way that they want to learn, they want to consume. So I think that's the biggest shift happening over here. So once again, thank you so much for taking the time out from your schedule to join us for this conversation, and we are really looking forward to hear from you your insights and expertise. Right, so moving ahead, this is our first audience poll before we kind of start deep diving into the discussion. So this is a question like, what is the biggest barrier preventing AI from delivering real business impact in your organization? You can select multiple options. I will just launch the poll from my end, and we will appreciate your participation. So it should be coming up on your screen anytime now.
We've got it.
Thank you. Right, so we see some responses coming in. Thank you for the participation. Let's see what kind of scores we get against those parameters. And more than 70% people have voted. We'll keep it open for another, maybe let's say 5-7 seconds, and then we look at the results. All right, I think it's time to call out the results. Thank you everyone for the participation. Really appreciate it. It's actually very interesting, Jeffrey and Alan. Fundamentally, lack of AI ready skills and role clarity. 60% people have voted for this. And the second one, it's also at 60%, governance, risk, or compliance concerns. And the reason I say it's interesting is, probably 6 months back or 1 year back, it was all about more about lack of AI ready skills and role clarity. But now kind of we are all warming up to the governance, risk, and the compliance concerns as well. So these two are our top areas. And the third one followed up is, at 40% is lack of coordination between L&D, IT, and the business. That's like, teams working in silos, if I may say, and, this little chance for more collaboration and too many tools, not enough focus. This is also at 40%. So I think lack of AI ready skills and role clarity, governance, risk, compliance concerns, too many tools, not enough focus, poor coordination between L&D, IT, and business. So I'll just end the poll and we will move ahead in the discussion. And again, these are very interesting points, and this will definitely help us in kind of structuring our conversation so that we start, clicking on some of these items. So yeah, Alan, the question for you is like, we know that, there's so many enterprise and AI initiatives that are happening, but in your opinion, what are some of those fundamental reasons because of which these AI initiatives are either getting stopped in between or they are not able to get a green light for scaling up or more investments, or they are not able to kind of deliver measurable business impacts? So your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I just want to comment on the poll. I thought one of the most striking things about that was the breadth of options there that had significant response. It doesn't surprise me. I think if we'd asked that same question a year ago, people would have had a much narrower understanding of what all of these different buckets of rules are. So I think that's great, and it demonstrates that maturity is not only happening across organizations, but it's happening pretty fast.
Yeah.
I think as I look at this question about the enterprise initiatives and their widely reported failures, I'm going to say that that also is a reflection of the same data that we're seeing in the poll. So I'm struck by the word Einstellung because as an academic, I'm supposed to give you a new word every time I come to do a thing, right? No, seriously, there's a psychology finding from 1940s that was called the Einstellung effect, and basically the idea behind this is that once you've solved a problem one way, you stop seeing simpler solutions. So the study basically took a bunch of people, had them solve a math problem, but gave them a very precise and fairly complex formula to solve a repeating or recurring math problem. And then later on, they slipped in problems that were so simple that a 5-year-old could do them, right? And people continued to apply the specific methodology that they had used, this complex methodology to solve these same problems, even when they were simple enough for a child to do, right? So the notion behind Einstellung is that we get caught into paths and processes, and that catch into those paths and processes can determine the way that we behave. So here's what I keep seeing. It's not just engineers, it's really every function. Somebody gets AI capability, the first thing they do is they try to automate the process that they were already doing. So they do what they were doing and they automate that process. It does it faster, they feel productive, and then they report back to their manager that, okay, so this is a win. I have automated a process. That's really the baby steps, the fundamental, like, oh, okay, I can leverage AI to automate a process that happens to be. But the reason I raise Einstein is because the process originally that they may have been trying to automate is often designed around a constraint that really doesn't exist any longer, because the most processes that we do in businesses and organizations today are processes that were designed to optimize flows for humans and to optimize the spend of humans. So we end up getting engineers who are, for example, focused on solving engineering scheduling problems using AI rather than focusing on kind of looking the other way and saying, hey, is this really the right problem for me to solve? I had an interesting conversation with Marshall Walker Lee from Atlassian, and we were talking about this problem and related problems, right? And one of the things that Marshall revealed was, he felt very strongly that most organizations were quickly filling in sort of 101 level AI training, and a few were starting to kind of think about high level 104 level training or 404 level training, but very few were dealing with what's in the middle. And I think that another extension of that idea is that we both agreed that ultimately we want our best performers, our best people, to be looking at this question of what should actually be done in relationship to the work that I do. Which of my work processes, which of my experiences are an automation problem? Okay, great, if that speeds it up. Or which ones of them are something much more significant, an opportunity to deliver a performance that wouldn't have been an opportunity before, because of time constraints, because of the expense of doing something, or just because of the notion that we don't generally think of part of our work as having an interactive conversation with another entity that can bounce back and forth about the way in which we approach a problem, the options around which we have to approach a problem, and so on. So there are all of these different kinds of opportunities that can exist now that couldn't exist pre-AI. And those are the kind of challenges, the explorations that begin to bubble up and become really interesting. That, when we think about it, we can think about it this way. What should my job actually be now that AI exists? There's a famous quote from Toffler, who warned us about this specific problem, right? So Toffler famously said something like, the illiterate of the future will not be those who cannot read, it'll be those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that's the kind of thing that this focuses me in on pretty sharply, is that we're going to have to do some deconstruction of presumptions. There's a giant area inside of training and education that affects everyone in every job. And it's an area that's a hot rail that we don't want to touch. And when we study this in the academic side, we call it the affective domain. And that means everything related to emotion and behavior, not necessarily those things which are related to knowledge acquisition. And the reason we traditionally don't touch these, or we kind of shy away from touching them, is because it begins to be about judgment, right? But judgment is probably the single most important thing that humans continue to have to offer in a human in the loop kind of experience. So
Right.
my thinking is that one, I'm not sure that we can summarily say, okay, all of these pieces are failing flat out. You know, we see these statistical numbers that suggest it. First, I think that if we looked at the same numbers a year later, we'd probably find that the numbers were starting to change and get a little more amorphous. Second, I think that there are more and more organizations and people who are realizing, wait a minute, there are different ways for us to fold this in and use it. And maybe we should stop looking for a magic button on our desk that makes AI do everything for us and start instead looking at these more complex and sophisticated reimaginings of how we do things, and that our expectations should perhaps shift a bit to, is the AI augmentation that we're doing, is it making a significant difference? It's one of the reasons I was so excited to get to talk with Jeffrey today, because I think healthcare is one of those spaces that is particularly important in leading the way here, because the business outcomes are a combination of financial business outcomes and morbidity outcomes, health outcomes specifically. So the notion of quality of care becomes really substantial. And I would suspect that we'll find more ready attention to deal with some of these behavioral affective domain issues inside of healthcare and similar spaces, inside of law, where judgment becomes a significant factor, and so on. So, yeah, those are my thoughts.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Alan. And I really liked what you said about the learn, unlearn, and the relearn piece. And I think in today's context, it's very important. I mean, and the second one, which I agree to, is that yes, there are endless possibilities and limitless possibilities with AI, but we have to kind of set the expectations for ourselves that it's not a magic button at our desk, like I just click this and it will do this. Like, the way I put it is like, instead of AI driving you, it should be the other way around. Think of it as a productivity enhancement tool or enablement tool, and you drive it to achieve the results. So we'll hear from Jeffrey as well. So Jeffrey, I think this question resonates with the audience poll, wherein 40% people who responded to the poll said that abandoned AI tools is probably one of the reasons. So your thoughts on this? Like, we all know that, the AI tools are abandoned every day. Like, there are multiple tools coming up for for accomplishing multiple tasks. But then why are team members, I mean, first of all, would you agree that, there is a little bit of struggle with the team members that, because of this AI abandoned tools, and it's becoming a bit overwhelming, or they're kind of trying to find it difficult to convert them into measurable business impact. So any thoughts, your views on it?
Yeah. I mean, I think just like we've learned in healthcare, when we talk about AI, we have to be really careful to help people understand the role that it has as compared to the role that each and every one of the professionals has.
Mm.
And I think in healthcare, what we learned is when AI was first coming out, at least being talked about as sort of a productivity or performance tool, recognizing that AI has been in our medical devices for quite a long time with profound results and impact on patient care, treatment planning, quality, things like health equity, etc. When we started to talk about it from a performance or even a learning tool, what you saw is many people, particularly nurses, that said, so this is how you're going to replace me? This is what you're going to do, to me, versus actually what can it do to help you? And I think that, we learned that we have to be very thoughtful on how we actually engage our community, engage our workforce, to actually ask them, as you teach them about it, how can it actually be leveraged to be of benefit to you? How could it be used to reduce burnout? How could it be used to not cause additional stress, but actually elevate the work that you do? And I think that, to Dr. Partridge's point, right? I mean, I think we respond to whatever we hear when we talk about this. And if it is something that stresses us, we're immediately going to struggle with a change management type of principle. And naturally, today, even more than ever, where frankly, we have to acknowledge, I mean, globally, mental health in the workplace is the worst that it's ever been. When we talk about anything that could impact one's job, they're automatically going to stop and be like, well, this is just going to take my job away. This is really extremely real right now in the higher education space. If you go on Reddit, which obviously, I don't pay a ton of attention to until team members come to me and say, hey, you need to, you'll see a lot of people commenting, and it's actually more former employees of different organizations and institutions commenting on how AI replaced them, and that because of AI replacing them, quality outcomes, different things have plummeted. And that's not a good use case of AI, because ultimately, if that was the use case of AI, you missed the boat. The use case of AI is how do you augment and actually create a better workplace, a better workforce optimization of what you all do. And so, from my vantage point, we have to be, especially as learning leaders, we have to be very thoughtful in how we talk about it. And then we also have to walk the walk and talk the talk. Because
Yeah.
if it's different than how we talk about it when it's implemented, they will also know that we really weren't being trustworthy throughout the process. But from my vantage point, I'll give you an example that I think celebrates this well. When I was at Siemens, we were doing work with a South Carolina hospital, and I got to actually go and see the benefits of this work. And, this was a very large imaging department, very busy, doing many, many scans each month, particularly in everything from cancer to heart disease to diabetes to so many different elements, surgery, etc. And the workers, I shouldn't say the workers, the imaging technologists particularly were very frustrated because it was taking them so much time to do order sets in the electronic medical record. So they'd actually, need to go in, do an order set that ultimately would be tied to a patient so they would get the scan that's required from an imaging perspective. So we at Siemens were able to leverage AI to actually improve the entire workflow of their order set. And instead of the team taking so much time each time with each patient on the order set, they were able to actually take time with the patient, do the scan, and it improved the throughput to the perspective that for the hospital, they were doing more procedures every month. But for the workforce, they were actually less frustrated because they weren't doing all that additional work in the technology, but they were actually able to do what they cared most about, which was the patients. And so that's a great example where no one was replaced. Actually, their work was enhanced and they felt good about it because ultimately they could see the benefit of it.
Right. No, actually, that's a great use case, and thank you for sharing that use case with us. I think what I understand from you, Jeffrey, is like in AI tools being abandoned, that's fine. That might, at the face of it, that might look as one of the challenges, but I think at the core of it, it is about engaging with your audience in terms of kind of coaching them and giving them that framework, like, in your particular domain or job area, what are the things that you can do to improve your productivity and, impact the business results. And I think what you mentioned about this Reddit comments and all, yeah, I mean, you know how it works. But yes, to a certain extent, the important point for us to note over here is AI alone cannot do those complex tasks or decision making which involves humans in the mix. So that's where I think Dr. Patridge will be talking later today, very specifically on AI with human in the loop, and we'll get his thoughts over there. So moving ahead, and I'll just do a quick check with the audience, is like, if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything that you want to add into the chat box, please do that. And I hope the conversation is flowing as per your expectations. And we won't mind if you put in a chat box and let us know that, hey guys, can you do something differently? This is getting boring. We'll be more than happy to do it. So, all right. So moving ahead, uh, I think Dr. Patridge, some of these challenges that we spoke about, and specifically some of these use cases that Jeffrey mentioned about healthcare workforce, it's an extended enterprise. So you have your internal employees, then you have your external HCPs, you have patient education, clinical education, medical devices education, all those kind of things. So And then, the 2 points, the engagement with your audience and with the AI and the human in the loop. So how does the Adobe Learning Manager addresses these challenges? And I understand that Adobe Learning Manager is designed to, provide an or create and help us design an extensible learning ecosystem with human in the loop learning models. So it will be very nice to kind of hear your thoughts. And Jeffrey, please feel free to comment in between, when Dr. Patridge is talking about some of those things, how it aligns with your thought process and some of the challenges that you might have faced in the healthcare workforce development industry. So, yeah.
Cool. So, let me contextualize this for you so that you realize I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time worrying about the depth of the technology. Let me try to put it in the context of what we talked about so far, so that everybody can kind of follow why this as part of an approach is an important factor. Um, so I've been thinking about this a lot lately. For decades, really, we have actually known how to develop the kind of capability that we need at scale. Um, we just couldn't deliver it at scale. So when we think about training, learning, upskilling people in large groups, we have existed in a same pattern for a very long time. Think about this as SCORM-based courses. Think about this as page turners. Think about this as quizzes. Think about this as all those kind of things, which for probably 40 years has hamstrung us as educators into this pattern of providing a kind of minimum viable online or electronic learning interaction. It's
Right.
very much been stuck in a pattern that was defined 40 years ago and that we know from the research is not the most effective way to handle it. So we, have an opportunity here to augment judgment, systemic thinking, the ability to handle ambiguity. Those things don't come from courses today. They come from Socratic dialogue, from in the flow guidance by someone more experienced than you working side by side with you, and from repeated exposure to messy scenarios, that structured reflection that happens after you've experienced some kind of messy scenario. And those kind of solutions are how we know that someone who's a sort of apprentice early on in their career becomes a master. And they're largely aligned to reflective practice. They're largely aligned to experience tangible things. And we know that a lot of what causes those to become effective is that knowledge transfer passes better when we manipulate data, when it's tangible to us, we interact with it actively, and it passes more effectively when there's a metastructure of judgment and understanding, which is informing decisions. Because you see, when we learn a fact, that's a fact. And that's great because we can apply the fact. Unfortunately, in most jobs, in most situations, facts are not what are actually required in order to perform whatever the task is at that moment in time. In fact, it's understanding a system, it's having judgment in a given situation with thousands of potential parameters influencing you. And we're nowhere near having an AI which is capable of handling any of that. I mean, one of the things I point to for folks is it can't really even see, right? It can get a description back. If you send an image to AI, it converts it into text and sends it back to itself so that it can understand it in terms of descriptive text. So when we're talking about AI, talking about large language models, and ultimately they're converting everything to text. So if you think about that for a moment, you realize, wait a minute, there are things that are better done by humans. Some of those are physical capabilities that don't exist yet for the AI, but some of them are about judgment, discretion, those kinds of things. And those have traditionally been the major value. And having that human to sit in the loop is really critically important. In fact, if you look at a lot of the latest LLMs and their conversational interactions, they're more and more in the habit of interjecting these kind of moments and opportunities where the AI is cooperative and creating a kind of conversational experience. And I strongly have found that that ultimately is the kind of underpinning that we should root ourselves in. So we have traditionally not done that kind of development for the whole
Mm.
organization. We've reserved it for the elites, the senior level directors, the C-level suite, and so on. We do it in leadership training. So we reserve that for the top 5% because it was expensive, right? It costs a lot of money. And you often really needed to have a human guide alongside the learner for that kind of educational experience. You wouldn't say have 2 million people in your frontline staff and then attempt to do Socratic dialogue based instruction because you need potentially a million plus mentors who could each then facilitate that kind of experience. So because of the scale issues, that was a constraint that we just couldn't handle. But this
Right.
may be giving us opportunities to cut those costs and make those experiences much more surfaceable. But then it starts to get into the question, well, how do I resolve the facilitative architecture to support these new innovations if these new innovations are going to go well beyond the kind of page turners and those kind of classic experiences. And I think that's the architectural question that the Adobe team has been surfacing for quite some time, looking at questions about how can we create an ecosystem that is not restricted by the old constraints, instead something that allows us to connect learning more effectively and impactfully to skills, to performance, understand that performance across the entirety of the organization. We look at the traditions in learning management kind of solutions. We traditionally only isolate that information to the LMS itself. In fact, data pollution, data coming from other systems, has been a big fear. So when you add the kind of solutions like data lakes that we're now working with, and you add the ability for interjection, open-ended architecture, you add the ability to integrate data coming from multiple sources, and then apply not just flat numbers onto the data, but actual intelligence and interpretation onto the data in real time, it starts to all get much more interesting and much more potentially valuable. I think we could argue that it's not necessarily what we have in mind when we think of learning management architecture. It's more like what we have in mind when we idealize what learning support systems could actually look like. The key to that is having an architecture that's completely open so that it can be seen as expansive. So if I want to connect it to my medical record system, if I want to connect it to my sales system, if I want to connect it to my skilling system, I want to connect it to individual assets that are coming in. If I'm in a medical context and I want to have Elsevier database of procedures that are getting piped in and processes interpreted to it, maybe I'm in the situation of having courses and content like the ones that I think Jeffrey is doing, where those, as I understand it, are more advanced trainings, right? They're more sophisticated kind of trainings. And those have architecturally struggled in the past because traditional LMSs don't necessarily support their architecture, right? And having the ability to extend and open that and have a much more trackable, experiential kind of solution becomes a big deal, especially for the training of professionals who are in the space of anything that requires judgment, anything that requires repetitive practice, anything that requires complex interactions. One of the things that's fascinated me for a long while about medicine in general is that you could give someone a list of all the things that should be done to diagnose a particular patient for a thing, and if they do it in the wrong sequence, they'll screw it up. And that's the difference between the amateur and the master inside of that space. So you've got implications for administrative costs because the administrative costs spiral when suddenly everybody's doing every single test they possibly can. And the advanced professional, the master, will almost instantly often know exactly how to skip from A to B and do cost savings at the same time and get to the diagnosis faster so the patient isn't suffering for longer. But the first starting, the novice, will struggle with that, and they will tend to do every process one at a time, and they can actually cause harm if they do the processes in a sequence which is harmful. So, and that then becomes a question of how do we understand and diagnose that and work that into the training solution, but also, um, how impactful can and should that be? Do you want administration to be alerted when a junior practicing professional has performed some series of tests which diagnostically shouldn't be done in that order? That raises the risk for the organization. So all of those, I'm anxious to hear from Jeffrey about that kind of stuff. Like, how relevant is that? Do you see that across medical profession? Do you see it in other professions? I think that, from the Adobe Learning Manager perspective, the gift that we've been given here is this open architecture that can be integrated with a variety of different fingers and arms, and that really drives us forward. One thing that I thought I would definitely mention here is solutions like the Experience Builder, new to Adobe Learning Manager, which takes this a step further and makes it so that portals can be created almost immediately and be created by a tech staff that's internal as opposed to an external. So you're looking at what would have cost a company, $250,000, $500,000 in some cases, to develop some specialized integration before, is now something that you can do in a matter of a week with your own internal staff. So that just echoes this notion that the costs are coming down. That doesn't necessarily mean you replace people. It means you put those people into new functions and jobs, not necessarily job lines, but new opportunities that can improve care, that can improve performance of the group overall, that can answer new questions. And that for an old guy who's been through this before, literally with the birth of the internet, this is exactly how people reacted then. They thought for sure the internet was going to collapse all their jobs. And all I know is that I was exhausted a year or two after the internet was a hot topic, and every other person who was doing professional things beside me was in the same situation. Our standards rose. And that's what happens in these situations historically, is that our standards become higher. People demand more. They see something better and they expect more.
Right. Now, thank you. This is actually very interesting. I think what I heard from you, and kind of I can resonate with it, is that the traditional LMSs, the way they were architected was, upload the training material and, track the SCOM reports, like, what is the assessment score and all those things. But the connecting the dots between learning, skills, and performance, this is something which, the industry has been talking a lot, for the last few years, and everyone realizes the importance of it. But I believe all of us would acknowledge in this room today is that, we're still not there. There's still a lot of scope to do. So with the kind of things that you mentioned, that, it has the capability of creating those multiple extensions, native extensions of the portals that can allow enterprises to kind of create that extensible learning ecosystem. That's what we are saying. And wherein we kind of connect the dots by bringing the data from learning, skills, performance, and, tying them together, and then demonstrate to the business that it's a measurable outcome. Yeah, absolutely. Right. I'm also eager to hear Jeffrey's thoughts on this. But before we move to you, Jeffrey, I wanted to call out Dr. Patrick that this is a great term that I learned today, data pollution. I think it's very relevant in today's context because there's so much data getting generated from all different sources. So yeah, that's something interesting. So yeah, Jeffrey, coming back to that aspect, like, extensible learning ecosystem and, connecting those dots between learning, skills, performance, how important that is, or, how do you resonate with it?
Yeah, I fully resonate with it. I mean, I think, particularly in the healthcare space, one of the things we regularly talk about from a learning and development perspective is you can't do learning and development effectively without both scale as well as bought in leaders from other parts of the organization. So, I mean, if you think about a hospital or if you think about even med tech or pharma, you do learning and development, you have to be able to get those other business leaders on board to really understand it. And I think, particularly with what Alan was talking about, right, is like, for those of us that love to learn and believe that it is transformational, which I always will say, I'm also a firm believer, and I, have got myself into trouble over the years when I've spoken at learning and development conferences, that learning and development should not report to human resources. I mean, learning and development ultimately should report to the CEO because it is transformational. And when we think about it today, L&D professionals at all levels of organizations have been tasked with, well, how do you help to retain the employees? How do you help to have career mobility? How do you help to grow them, upskill, reskill? But oftentimes, what I often have found and continue to believe is that human resources, while I appreciate that the role that they play, they tend to be a bit more transactional in nature. Hire, fire, evaluate, benefits, more transactional as compared to learning and development professionals who are always thinking about the person. How do we grow them personally and professionally? What do we do for them in a way that actually contributes to the performance of the organization? What do we do for them that contributes to the performance of them? Because some of the best learning and development professionals that I have found know that it's more about the helping the people than it is always about the organization. If you help one person grow, they're going to benefit your organization. And if they do leave your organization because of your work, they're going to benefit our society as a whole, our community as a whole. So for me, it's when I heard Alan talk, for me, it's all about scalability. When I talk to, chief learning officers and those in this field all the time, and also what I've heard them say time and time again about AI is that they've appreciated that it provides them a really cool opportunity to scale. That they tend to have small teams, which I think is another piece that's really unfortunate, frankly. When I talk to CEOs and boards, I always tell them, like, have you looked at the size of your learning and development team and then wondered why you have some of the challenges that you have? Invest in them. And when you invest in them, you'll see the results. I think about Merck, their chief learning officer has done some phenomenal work to tie their actual work to her business performance, and they've shown the results. So when other people do that, there are ways to do this. Now, the final point I'll just say is whatever you do here, I still believe you want to ask the frontline workforce because
Right.
asking them how they want to use AI, how it's best to use AI, will become more of a democratization of the effort. And when you get that buy-in, the chances are you're going to get more buy-in from bottom up than top down. Because generally, at least in healthcare, what we've learned, and the electronic medical record, which Alan highlighted, is a good example of this. We went top down. We never went bottom up. And to this day, you will not walk in a hospital, you probably haven't had a medical appointment, where a doctor or a nurse practitioner or a nurse or a colleague will say to you, that terrible electronic medical record. Like the amount of time I have to spend in that versus spend time with you as a patient is maddening. And there's an example where we used technology to improve, but we actually made it somewhat worse in terms of the patient experience and the provider clinician experience. And so we have to go bottom up with this. It just does not work if you go top down. Now, can you go top down and bottom up? Sure. But you've got to be very thoughtful around how you're engaging the entire workforce. And again, I'm not suggesting that you're going to go out to every single person, but there are ways through focus groups, surveys, input, forums, town halls, whether you're virtual or in person, to get at their input.
Right. Thank you. That's really very interesting. I think a couple of keywords that I heard from you is one is the scalability part. Thank you for calling that out. That really makes a difference. So if you have a solution or a system or an application that is scalable, it makes things much more easier for the end users and the administrators both. And thank you very much again for calling out the frontline workforce, because I think not only in healthcare, apart from healthcare, a lot of other industries, there's a lot of there's a lot of emphasis on upskilling the frontline workforce to impact the business results, and that's where I think including them in the scheme of things and asking them like, what can help. Uh, I had heard from someone at Hertz, the car rental company. They have done some very great work by leveraging AI with human in the loop for their frontline workforce development. And I'm sure a lot of other organizations have also done. So, and in the interest of time, because this topic is so interesting, I mean, sometimes I always feel like even in today's day, when people say that, how can you do a 60-minute webinar and ensure that 80% of your audience stays with you till the top of the hour? So, firstly, thank you to the audience who have stayed back. Most of you have stayed back, so thank you very much. And but these topics are such that it requires a lot of conversation. But there comes a time when you get a reminder for a time check. So we have 9 minutes. We have to cover one audience poll, and we have to cover the pilot section, and then we have to open up for the Q&A. So we'll do the audience poll quickly next, and then we will try to wrap up the other slides so that we can have at least like 6-7 minutes for the uh, conversation. And I think Jeffrey has kind of answered this question that we had, like how can extensible learning ecosystems enable scalable AI adoption? So moving ahead, I'll just launch the second poll. It should be coming up on your screens in a moment now. Okay. Yeah, it should be there now.
There it
so
is.
this second, yeah, thanks, Alan. So yeah, again, you can select multiple options. If you were to sponsor one AI initiative this year, okay, what would matter most while deciding to greenlight it? So is it clear, measurable business outcomes, strong change management and adoption? Jeffrey spoke in length about change management, governance, accuracy, and compliance. I think a lot of 60% of the audience had polled for this, so I think this will be repeat. Fast time to value with minimal IT dependency. And that's where the scalable ecosystem or the scalable extensible learning ecosystem comes into picture. If there's something which you can implement once and scale it with your internal teams, that was what Dr. Patridge was talking about. So is that would be a thing to consider. So yeah, and then lastly, like still unsure what a good pilot looks like. I mean, if you have that thoughts in your mind. So let's see what are the poll results that we are getting. Okay, so thank you everyone for kind of participating in this. Do we have a clear winner? Okay, firstly, the good news is we have 0% votes for still unsure what a good pilot looks like. So that's a very good situation to be in. And so we have a clear winner over here. 67% people have voted for clear, measurable business outcomes. And the second next is 44%, which was expected, the governance, accuracy, and compliance. So we'll end this poll. And Dr. Patridge, like in probably a couple of minutes, if I may request, if you can talk a little bit about, how should people think about launching a lean, practical, measurable AI pilot?
Absolutely. And I'll try to do this real quickly. I want to tell you about WestJet. WestJet is a Canadian airline, and they needed to train 1,100 employees from office staff to the aircraft maintenance engineers who actually keep the planes flying before they could transition to a new maintenance system. It was a very high stakes, safety critical kind of work, and they had a structural problem that traditional training couldn't solve. These folks work irregular hours. You can't put them in the classroom on a Tuesday at 10 a.m. because half of them are on the tarmac somewhere. So Lindsay Steffler, Lindsay is their standards manager, took a very specific bet. 12 airports, 6 weeks, one workflow, blended digital learning built in Captivate and delivered through Adobe Learning Manager. They trained over 800 staff in those first 6 weeks. 66% faster onboarding as a result. And here's the number I found really interesting, a 50% return training rate. Half of the users came back to do extra simulations on their own time. That's really not compliance anymore. That's engagement, right? And so I thought WestJet was a particularly good example of this, and it's worth noting that what did Lindsay do? She approached the problem by breaking it off into a bite-sized chunk, identifying a line of business leader or a leader inside the organization who had a specific challenge or problem, and then going at it from a highly professional direction, one that was sensitive to the abilities that AI could augment for her, but also something that she could deliver and measure easily. I thought the other just brilliant move here is the inclusion of that return training opportunity. That's a metric that we often don't pick up because we don't, very few people go back to get more training after they've had training. So I thought that was a particularly strong play on WestJet's part. Lots of great examples of that, but I'll toss that out there because I think that if you're looking for a formula, bite size, narrow the scope, aim at a specific problem or initiative, and then attempt to grow from there. Because what then happens is other leaders at WestJet come to Lindsay and say, "Why'd you do a thing for them?" And that's what you want, right? Then and think about it, it's directly what Jeffrey was saying. It's aligned to a business outcome. And that's how you end up in the boardroom instead of ending up in the office of the HR division.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alan. And for the audience, I know this was a little short time for, talking about the AI pilot, but if you would like to know a little bit more about this, my colleague would be posting the email IDs of Jeffrey and Alan in the chat box. You can reach out to them and you can even reach out to me. We can set up those conversations and have those conversations. At the end of the webinar, you'll also get a survey through the Zoom link wherein you can select an option that, yes, I would like to learn more about this or have a conversation. We'd be happy to have those separate one-on-one conversations with you. And another interesting aspect that I wanted to share with you, we all wanted to share with you, is that there's an Adobe Learning Summit happening in Vegas, if I remember correctly.
In Vegas, at the Bellagio, in
Bellagio.
June.
So that's happening in June, mid of June, towards end of June. So my colleague will put in the details. So apart from the Adobe team, a lot of industry leaders, experts also show up for those conferences. And that's a great kind of event to kind of mingle around, learn from, or, get to talk to peers from your similar industries or domains and understand like how they have solved some of those challenges and all. And again, just to remind everyone, this is a joint webinar sponsored by Adobe and Harbinger. And Jeffrey is our industry expert today. And again, thank you very much, Alan and Jeffrey, for joining us for this conversation. We are up for questions. Please feel free to, type in your questions in the chat box, and we would be happy to address them. Whatever we are able to address them during this meeting, we will do that. Or if anything is left, then we will address them by the emails, right? So yeah, please go ahead with your thoughts, questions. And if no questions, if you want to agree, disagree with something what was discussed today, you can share those thoughts as well. It's always a learning from both sides. So we'll be happy to kind of learn from you as well. All right. So I see one question coming in. Let me read out that question. This is very interesting, and probably, Jeffrey, I will direct this towards you if you're comfortable with this. How can L&D teams ensure AI adoption supports people rather than simply increasing pressure for productivity?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think you certainly have to have a bottom-up approach, and you have to keep that. In fact, some of the best practices that I've seen is, when you're doing L&D, one of the things that I would always recommend L&D leaders to do is actually establish, whether you want to call it an advisory board and actually have it, comprised of individuals from those front lines, from those critical roles that may not be in management, so that they can also be, critical voices. You certainly have to continue to do surveys and focus groups to make sure that what you're doing is helping. You also have to do a lot of change management, and it has to be, healthy dialogue to help people through this. But ultimately, I think making sure that you have intentionality around getting those voices into the process can certainly help them feel like they're actually being heard and valued for the critical work that they do.
Right. And thank you for taking that question. You see, there's one more, and let me read out that question. So maybe Dr. Patridge will take your opinion on this one, your thoughts on this one. Like, what capabilities, or what are those 2, 3 top capabilities should L&D teams build internally before scaling up AI-enabled learning initiatives?
I think that I would consider carefully that question and ask yourself what capability can we expand into? And it's going to depend on what's on your docket, right? So I like to use an Eisenhower matrix or similar to resolve prioritization questions. I never met ID leadership, L&D leadership in any organization who was able to satisfy all of the incoming requests that they have for developing learning content. So if you ask any L&D leader, and I'm sure Jeffrey will have his own method, they'll tell you that they have to have a method which strips away things that will never get done, things that are possible to do, but that have low benefit to the organization, and things that they want to do desperately, but they don't have the resources or bandwidth to accomplish. I think it's that quadrant, things that you want to do desperately, but don't have the resources or bandwidth, that now is the time to focus on that and look at what ways you can bring those capabilities and skills into your workflow and pipeline. Some obvious ones that occur are things like subject matter expert contributions through generative solutions and the like. I know a lot of our focus lately is on specifically bringing in learning development tools directly into the learning technology stack, as opposed to having them be a separate entity and just weaving them right inside so that they're more convenient and capable. As you know, you've already heard me make my pitch for scenarios. I'm a strong believer that scenarios and advanced management training solutions are a big part of what's gonna be possible. I've also seen some great virtual coaching kinds of apps and solutions. I think that that's worth an evaluation at this point. I've seen a few that are out there that are quite interesting and quite compelling. They might be right for your use case. So I think it's a good time to evaluate those technologies and those kind of solutions. But I think also in terms of their individual capabilities, there's a certain degree of fundamental training that also might be useful. I was sometimes I forget about articles that I've written but not published. I was working the other day on an article that was specifically about the relationship between object-oriented programming and thought processes. I think there's some of that fundamental work that may benefit broad sectors of organizations, understanding concepts and principles that might help them work better with any AI. So I think there's some of that too, some of that what Marshall Lee described as sort of the 202 level courses and the 302 level courses that are introducing specific skills that go beyond. Beyond that, they're the same skills that I would have told you before: creative problem solving, critical thinking, judgment, all of those kinds of things that for years we have said are really critical. If you've ever brought in a whole batch of interns, the list of things that everybody's complaining about is the list of things that are clear capabilities that need to be augmented as people join the workforce.
Right. You summarized it well for us, Dr. Patridge, and thank you so much. And sorry to the audience and to the panelists as well. We have overran our runway by 5 minutes, but thank you so very much for this active participation and this wonderful conversation. And above all, staying with us for these 60 odd minutes or 65 odd minutes. Thank you, Dr. Patridge, and thank you, Jeffrey, for taking the time out today. Really appreciate this conversation.
Thanks, Rahul.
Thank,
Thanks, Jeffrey.
thank you all. Yeah, thank you all very much.